veterans themselves can be happy. Since we have pronounced the word modesty, and since we conceal nothing, we ought to say that once, nevertheless, in spite of his ecstasies, his Ursule caused him very serious grief. It was on one of the days when she persuaded M. Leblanc to leave the bench and stroll along the walk. A brisk May breeze was blowing, which swayed the crests of the plantain trees. The father and daughter, arm in arm, had just passed Marius' bench. Marius had risen to his feet behind them, and was following them with his eyes, as was fitting in the desperate situation of his soul. All at once, a gust of wind, more merry than the rest, and probably charged with performing the affairs of springtime, swept down from the nursery, flung itself on the alley, enveloped the young girl in a delicious shiver, worthy of Virgil's nymphs, and the fauns of Theocritus, and lifted her dress, the robe more sacred than that of Isis, almost to the height of her garter. A leg of exquisite shape appeared. Marius saw it. He was exasperated and furious. The young girl had hastily thrust down her dress, with a divinely troubled motion, but he was none the less angry for all that. He was alone in the alley, it is true. But there might have been someone there. And what if there had been someone there? Can anyone comprehend such a thing? What she had just done is horrible. Alas, the poor child had done nothing. There had been but one culprit, the wind. But Marius, in whom quivered the Bart Hollow who exists in Cherubin, was determined to be vexed, and was jealous of his own shadow. It is thus, in fact, that the harsh and capricious jealousy of the flesh awakens in the human heart, and takes possession of it, even without any right. Moreover, setting aside even that jealousy, the sight of that charming leg had contained nothing agreeable for him. The white stocking of the first woman he chanced to meet would have afforded him more pleasure. When his Ursule, after having reached the end of the walk, retraced her steps with M. Leblanc, and passed in front of the bench on which Marius had seated himself once more, Marius darted a sullen and ferocious glance at her. The young girl gave way to that slight straightening up with a backward movement, accompanied by a raising of the eyelids, which signifies, "Well, what is the matter?" This was their first quarrel. Marius had hardly made this scene at her with his eyes, when someone crossed the walk. It was a veteran, very much bent, extremely wrinkled, and pale, in a uniform of the Louis XV pattern, bearing on his breast the little oval plaque of red cloth, with the crossed swords, the soldier's cross of St. Louis, and adorned, in addition, with a coat sleeve, which had no arm within it, with a silver chin and a wooden leg. Marius thought he perceived that this man had an extremely well-satisfied air. It even struck him that the aged cynic, as he hobbled along past him, addressed to him a very fraternal and very merry wink, as though some chance had created an understanding between them, and as though they had shared some piece of good luck together. What did that relic of Mars mean by being so contented? What had passed between that wooden leg and the other? Marius reached a paroxysm of jealousy. Perhaps he was there, he said to himself. Perhaps he saw. And he felt a desire to exterminate the veteran. With the aid of time, all points grow dull. Marius' wrath against Ursule, just and legitimate as it was, passed off. He finally pardoned her. But this cost him a great effort. He sulked for 3 days. Nevertheless, in spite of all this, and because of all this, his passion augmented and grew to madness. Chapter 9. Eclipse. The reader has just seen how Marius discovered, or thought that he discovered, that she was named Ursule. Appetite grows with loving. To know that her name was Ursule was a great deal. It was very little. In 3 or 4 weeks, Marius had devoured this bliss. He wanted another. He wanted to know where she lived. He had committed his first blunder, by falling into the ambush of the bench by the gladiator. He had committed a second, by not remaining at the Luxembourg when M. Leblanc came thither alone. He now committed a third, and an immense one. He followed Ursule. She lived in the Rue de l'Ouest, in the most unfrequented spot, in a new, 3-story house, of modest appearance. From that moment forth, Marius added to his happiness of seeing her at the Luxembourg the happiness of following her home. His hunger was increasing. He knew her first name, at least, a charming name, a genuine woman's name. He knew where she lived. He wanted to know who she was. One evening, after he had followed them to their dwelling, and had seen them disappear through the carriage gate, he entered in their train and said boldly to the porter, "Is that the gentleman who lives on the first floor, who has just come in?" "No," replied the porter. "He is the gentleman on the 3rd floor." Another step gained. This success emboldened Marius. "On the front?" he asked. "Parbleu!" said the porter, "the house is only built on the street." "And what is that gentleman's business?" began Marius again. "He is a gentleman of property, sir. A very kind man who does good to the unfortunate, though not rich himself." "What is his name?" resumed Marius. The porter raised his head and said, "Are you a police spy, sir?" Marius went off quite abashed, but delighted. He was getting on. "Good," thought he, "I know that her name is Ursel, that she is the daughter of a gentleman who lives on his income, and that she lives there, on the 3rd floor, in the Rue de l'Ouest." On the following day, M. Leblanc and his daughter made only a very brief stay in the Luxembourg. They went away while it was still broad daylight. Marius followed them to the Rue de l'Ouest, as he had taken up the habit of doing. On arriving at the carriage entrance, M. Leblanc made his daughter pass in first, then paused, before crossing the threshold, and stared intently at Marius. On the next day they did not come to the Luxembourg. Marius waited for them all day in vain. At nightfall, he went to the Rue de l'Ouest, and saw a light in the windows of the 3rd story. He walked about beneath the windows until the light was extinguished. The next day, no one at the Luxembourg. Marius waited all day, then went and did sentinel duty under their windows. This carried him on to 10 o'clock in the evening. His dinner took care of itself. Fever nourishes the sick man, and love the lover. He spent a week in this manner. M. Leblanc no longer appeared at the Luxembourg. Marius indulged in melancholy conjectures. He dared not watch the porte-cochère during the day. He contented himself with going at night to gaze upon the red light of the windows. At times he saw shadows flit across them, and his heart began to beat. On the 8th day, when he arrived under the windows, there was no light in them. "Hello!" he said, "the lamp is not lighted yet. But it is dark. Can they have gone out?" He waited until 10 o'clock. Until midnight. Until 1 in the morning. Not a light appeared in the windows of the 3rd story, and no one entered the house. He went away in a very gloomy frame of mind. On the morrow, for he only existed from morrow to morrow, there was, so to speak, no today for him. On the morrow, he found no one at the Luxembourg. He had expected this. At dusk, he went to the house. No light in the windows. The shades were drawn. The 3rd floor was totally dark. Marius rapped at the porte-cochère, entered, and said to the porter, "The gentleman on the 3rd floor?" "Has moved away," replied the porter. Marius reeled and said feebly, "How long ago?" "Yesterday." "Where is he living now?" "I don't know anything about it." "So he has not left his new address?" "No." And the porter, raising his eyes, recognized Marius. "Come. So it's you," said he, "but you are decidedly a spy then?"